Got over 200 people joining now. This is fantastic. It's wonderful to see so many people out on a Thursday night who want to talk about what's next for the BC climate movement. We've got guests tonight. Ashley Zarbatany is here from the grassroots wing of the BC NDP, chair of the Standing Committee on Environment and Economy, here to talk about opportunities for people who are still BC NDP members. Sonia Theroux is here to talk about the inside-outside fight in politics from her perspective as a veteran campaigner. She's worked with the federal Greens, the provincial Greens, worked at the civic level, and was the co-executive director of Lead Now. We're very lucky to have Sonia here tonight. And Namox is the head chief of the Theroux clan of the Wet'suwet'en. We're going to be hearing from him in a minute about options outside of the political system, the solidarity, the action that's needed right now in the climate fight beyond the inside baseball of political parties. So I'm excited to hear from all of our guests in a minute, but we're going to start by asking Alexandra Woodsworth, our campaigns manager at Dogwood and a student, a scholar of social movements who's been looking at the climate justice movement for many years, just to give us some context and help us understand what we just witnessed in BC. So Alexandra, if I can start with you, do you want to just give us your perspective on what we just saw unfold in the BC NDP leadership race?
Thanks, Kai. And yeah, I'm honored to be here with such an illustrious panel. And I am truly just so excited to see how much interest and excitement there is and how many folks are coming out tonight. And I think there's a reason for that. This just felt like such an incredibly powerful moment in BC politics and in the climate movement. And we are powerful, and that's that kind of feeling that I think this momentum is here. It's carrying on. I'm just really excited that folks are feeling that, along with a whole bunch of other feelings too that we can get into. But I do want to start us off by celebrating a little bit of that kind of moment in history and in politics. Because however this ended, we really did collectively accomplish something absolutely amazing here. Going into this race, the BC NDP has been letting us down over and over and over again on climate. Going in, the party's preferred candidate, David Eby, promised no radical change. He announced no climate platform. And really the few words he spoke about it were some pretty tired old lines about BC becoming an energy superpower. And coming out, he was quoted last week saying we can't keep expanding fossil fuel infrastructure and expect our emissions to come down. And he's reaching out to the thousands and thousands of new members who joined, excited about climate action and Indigenous rights, and really making overtures to those folks. Now, those are words. Words are easy. Action is obviously what we need, and that accountability is what we're going to need to see and look for. But there was a huge political space that was created over the course of a very short amount of time here on climate in particular. And kind of that's pretty amazing to see. And the governing party now has to really wrestle with that. And, ignore the climate movement at your peril is kind of a watchword I've seen from a bunch of pundits over the course of the race recently. So, it's powerful, it's organized. Don't ignore us. So that's exciting and that feels good. And I also really want to just take a minute to acknowledge what a victory this was for organized people power. The kind of sign-up drive that was mobilized across so many different groups and just so organically over such a short amount of time was truly inspiring and incredible. And huge thanks to all those Dogwood volunteers and all of you, whether you were with Dogwood or somewhere else, who was reaching out to folks and just really getting out among your networks, because that's really how I felt it. Dogwood, called through our list and volunteers to help with that, but I also just kept hearing people all over the place reaching out to their personal networks. And that was a really fascinating thing to witness and watch. So at the end of the day, at the end of that drive, when the sign up portion wound up, the reported numbers are somewhere between 10 to 14,000 for a climate champion and somewhere between 2 to 6,000 for kind of the party's pick for who should lead this province going forward. And I think what I want to talk about now is a little bit about why the NDP responded as they did. And that's why, because there were that many people who signed up to challenge the status quo and to look for something different to lead the party and someone else, some other values that could drive us forward going forward. And I think that looks like proof of the power built by the climate movement, by youth, disillusioned party members, folks getting involved for the first time, this coalition that came together. And what it looked like is, according to reports, the inside party brass were literally freaking out. This is what, the Breach reported and the Maple reported some pretty interesting phone calls being made. And they panicked and they pulled out all the stops and they pulled some really dirty tricks that, Dogwood was on the receiving end of, and a lot of other folks were out too. And this is not just the status quo candidate pulling these tricks. This is not just the party brass. I also want to be really clear that there are unelected forces out there whose interests are served by those folks staying in power, who I think were also threatened by a climate champion becoming premier, and we're also pulling out all those stops and part of that. And of course, we've heard a lot about what that looked like. It looked like a very aggressive smear campaign against a big chunk of the party's own members. And it looked like a really careful construction of a strategy by the BC NDP's internal chief electoral officer, Elizabeth Cull, a former NDP cabinet minister, a current lobbyist for a large global lobbying firm called Hill & Knowlton, who has a long list of oil and gas clients, and really pulling together this careful strategy that was about neutralizing this threat that the party was freaking out about, and disqualifying the insurgent candidate. So, as we've also all heard, I just want to take a minute to talk about Dogwood's role in all of this. We showed up 98 times. I control F'd it in Elizabeth Cull's report, and a lot in the media coverage, and a lot of folks here are Dogwood supporters and allies and champions who are probably kind of wondering, what the heck's going on there. So I just wanted to pause for a moment and zoom back and out as to why we as Dogwood engaged in this leadership race in the first place. And fundamentally, there's a principle at play here, which is we believe in expanding participation in democracy. We believe that all eligible British Columbians should have a right to have a say in who's going to become the next leader of our province and shape all of our futures. And because we are sliding into a climate emergency and we need to use every tool at our disposal to avoid the worst of that, to stop the ongoing harms of colonization, and make life better for all of us. And this was an opportunity that we really saw to do that. And we started talking about this a year ago, late last year, like a very long time ago, about encouraging our supporters to vote for BC's next premier whenever that opportunity came about. And we got serious about it when we heard that Premier Horgan was stepping down. So our sign-up drive was planned long before any candidate entered the race, and we pulled the trigger on it when a candidate came into the race that made it no longer an acclamation of David Eby, but a contested race. So I don't have time tonight to do a line-by-line rebuttal of all the points in the Cull report, but I do just want to make three things clear. One is that Elections BC doesn't regulate party leadership races. Those rules are set by the party, and they were changed 3 times over the course of the race as part of this disqualification strategy. And the only rules that were ever made public that were set out by the party, which we reviewed, didn't mention anything about the activities of third parties like us. The rules that came later in the race that were part of this strategy that Elizabeth Cull was building to disqualify Angeli, to make false allegations against us, were never provided to Dogwood. Second piece here is that Election BC does regulate third-party spending. We follow those rules. We spoke to them numerous times over the course of the race, and Elections BC has confirmed again this week several times now that it has never had grounds to investigate Dogwood. And the last one I just want to hit on is this nasty fraudulent memberships piece, which is like a really, fraud is a big word. And I just want to make a very basic point here, because we could go on forever, which is that people have the right to join and leave political parties over time. That is a right that we all have as citizens. And I think it's very normal. Pundits across the board have been talking about how this is just normal. It's part of a healthy democracy. It's normal in leadership races. And zeroing in on this piece was also really a part of Cull's strategy. So obviously, with the way that they did this vetting, it wouldn't have been hard to get rid of members that were found to be dual, to still be holding 2 dual memberships. But instead, they chose to shut down the whole race, disqualify their candidate, and deny all the members the right to choose. So Paige, maybe you can pop in that blog here. We've got a much longer place where you can explore kind of some of those key kind of allegations and our view on all of that there. And really where this all leads to from me is that it wasn't nice, right? Things got messy, things were divisive, and there were huge double standards at play here. And kind of, most of all, it kind of reinforced this cynicism that I really want us to fight back against as people who care about democracy and participation. Not to mention the fact that BC's governing party, the BC NDP, changed its own rules to do a whole bunch of things. So what we think is it's time for internal party contests like leadership races, nomination races, really to be brought under the oversight of an independent regulator, Elections BC, just really to give us all a level playing field. Regulate us, tell us all what we need to do here, make it really clear, make a level playing field, and really let's help boost that confidence and kind of push back against that cynicism around how really key figures are chosen who are gonna lead our province. So just a couple quick takeaways from me, and then we'll hand over, which is, we really did something big here together, and I'm so excited that all of us did that together, and it made a big splash, made a big reaction. And there's a lot of different fallout that a lot of folks are still sifting through. The biggest takeaway I've seen kind of across the board, wherever you land on all of these different kind of issues and allegations, is that the party may have shot itself in the foot here. They created a mess of their own making. They alienated a big section of their base over a long time by some pretty brutal decisions around Site C and LNG. They let their base shrink, and then they just were not prepared for that base to come flooding back and join forces with this broad coalition that I talked about at the beginning, and out-organize them. And that's kind of, I think, the key takeaway, that there's a lot of agreement around that. And there's a lot of feelings too. And I think Kai's going to ask a question now around how all of us in this Zoom room are feeling tonight in a minute. Whether it's just such anger that you were denied a right to vote, or frustration at how badly your preferred candidate may have been treated. That kind of uncertainty around all these different stories out there. How could this have happened when we were following the rules? And that disillusionment around, we worked really hard. We shook that kind of inner circle to its core, but it had all those tools of power at its disposal, and it fought back hard, and it won this round. And that's really disappointing. We can't really, not much we can say about that. And yeah, it leads to a lot of questions around what next. That's what we're here to talk about tonight. And we're going to hand over to some folks to hear about that. But I want to just leave one last thought from me. I feel like we kind of came closer to touching real power through this than we have in issue-based campaigns in a really long time. And I've been doing this a long time in BC. I've been doing this a long time in other parts of the world. And it was an experiment for a lot of us, for me, for Dogwood, for a lot of us around, who often work kind of in different sections, over here doing climate activism, and over here getting out the vote for progressive politicians. But this kind of explosion of energy and mobilizing and organizing that happened here when movements and electoral politics got brought together, a little closer together than maybe we're used to, felt like the force multiplier is kind of the word I came up with. And it ended with a bang, but it really is just one chapter here. And I am so excited to hear what folks have to say about where we should go next, and where that kind of movement linked electoral politics may lead us next, within and beyond. And that's me, and I look forward to hearing from y'all. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Alexandra. Quick update on participation. We've got 300 people watching at this point, which is fantastic. Great turnout tonight. Because there's so many of us, yes, people are muted by default. During the Q&A section later, we can unmute people who've got questions they want to put to the panel. But for now, just to keep things tidy, we are muted. You can put your questions in the Q&A section of Zoom at the bottom of your screen, or you can participate in the chat. I would just say, we're going to hear some perspectives tonight that you might not agree with. We're going to hear from a broad range of folks, so just try to keep it respectful in the chat. We are hopefully pushing in the same direction. And I wanted to put a little poll up just to get a temperature check. We'll put up a poll and you can answer it at your leisure over the next few minutes, just to get a sense of how people are feeling emotionally after the first phase of the NDP leadership race. I know there's folks in the chat pointing out that it's not over, and I think in some ways that's true, but wanted to get your sense of how you're feeling about the way things have gone so far. So at this point, I want to turn things over to our panel. And I thought maybe I would just ask them to go around the table and introduce themselves and talk about a moment when you really felt the power of community organizing. So I'll ask Ashley to go first, and then Sonia and Namox.
Thank you, and thank you for having me here. I'm zooming in from the unceded territories of the Songhees and Esquimalt First Nations, otherwise known as Victoria. And it is an honor to be here with such an amazing panel. A little bit about myself. I've been an activist basically since the G20 in 2010. And I've been working within the BC NDP over the past few years to try to bring forward a moratorium on LNG development and climate action and a Green New Deal for BC. When I think about times that I have felt the power of organizing, it actually reminds me of when I was doing a lot of anti-pipeline and Indigenous solidarity organizing in Montreal. And specifically this one night, I had just gotten back from Elsipogtog, and it was a couple days. I had just been back for a couple days, and I woke up in the morning and I heard about the raid, the paramilitarized police raid. And for those who don't know what was happening in Elsipogtog territories, they were fighting SNL, which was an American fracking company, which wanted to frack on their territories and destroy their land. And we had gone there to support them and to document what was happening. And when I got back to Montreal and I found out that the raid was happening, I felt so scared and so many emotions, and I felt so discouraged. And in that political context of being in Montreal and doing Indigenous solidarity, anti-pipeline activism, it was a very hard time for activists. There was a lot of police repression. It was in the fall of 2013. It was right after the student strike. They had a very bloated police budget, and they would often kettle protesters and tear gas us, and they always used riot police against us, and it was just extreme police repression all the time. And it actually took me years when I moved away to overcome the PTSD that I had from that police repression. I couldn't listen to fireworks for a few years without thinking, oh my gosh, it's tear gas canister or something. So those have lasting impacts and scars on people. But at that moment in time, that morning, I was just so overwhelmed with what was happening, and I wanted to do something, and I felt so powerless. But then I saw that in Vancouver, Harsha Walia was putting on a solidarity march, and I thought, what am I doing? I've got to put one of those on. So I got to work, and I put together, I organized in a few hours a big solidarity march. We showed up at the RCMP detachment, and there were over 500 people that came out last minute, just like that. And it was such a diverse, beautiful group of people. We had elders from Ganawage and Ganasatage, and like people from all over were there to support the Mi'kmaq and to stand in solidarity. And it was such a beautiful feeling. And it was such a powerful organizing moment, because in that moment, even though we had suffered so much and we were feeling so hopeless and lost and desperate, we came together, and they didn't expect us. And we were able to march across the entire city. They couldn't kettle us because they didn't even know we were coming. And we just caught them off guard. And it was really beautiful. We had a beautiful march, and we took back our streets, and we were able to really push. And a few months later, like, they really didn't expect so much solidarity. And I don't think they saw the movement that was being built. And we did a lot of organizing on the ground to build that movement of solidarity for them. And they didn't see it coming, but we did it. And in a few months after that, they actually, SNL packed their bags and they got out of there. And I mean, that was an amazing struggle to witness, to stand in solidarity with. The Mi'kmaq were amazing land defenders, and it was a successful battle. And I just think back to that moment because we were up against such a powerful force, and we had all of these situations where we felt like we weren't making any progress, but we continued to persevere and persist and do that groundwork of organizing that needs to happen. And in the end, we won. And in the same way, I think that that's really reflective of what we've been doing within the BC NDP. I've faced many barriers over the past few years of trying to change the BC NDP from the inside and bring it back to its grassroots core values of putting people before profit. And those barriers have been huge, but we proved that if we do that groundwork, if we do that organizing, we can actually do amazing things. They didn't expect this, but we almost won. We should have won. We basically did win. So I think that that's just incredible. Everything that we've done together these past few months, it kind of came out of nowhere, it seems, but we've been laying the groundwork, and I think that that's a valuable lesson.
Thanks so much, Ashley.
Thank you.
And thank you for reminding us that it's a long fight. That fight that we saw in Elsipogtog is still going on. And thank you for your role in leading that in many different ways. Sonia, do you want to introduce yourself and just talk about a moment when you felt the power of organizing?
Yes, thank you, Kai. Sonia, she, her pronouns, also hailing from the traditional territories of the Lekwungen speaking peoples. So hello, neighbor Ashley. I will start by saying I took on the role at Lead Now partly because I was breaking up with partisan politics, and I really appreciate that organizations like Dogwood and Lead Now exist to give people an avenue to engage in politics when they're not really ready for partisan politics or don't feel like it's accessible, which leads me to a moment that I felt most powerful as an organizer. Well, first of all, generally speaking, I think I feel the most powerful when I'm teaching about organizing and campaigning, because in a technical digital age, I think it feels further and further from reach from the average person how to take the reins of organizing and take the reins of power. But as everyone here knows, in some ways, it's really quite simple. It's about engaging with people, about things that you're passionate about and bringing them along. So that's what I feel most powerful doing, is basically removing knowledge barriers and skill barriers so that people can go forth and make change in their communities. But one single moment that I'll briefly touch on, I wasn't an organizer so much as an organized person on a phone bank, my first ever phone bank in the 90s, in the 20th century, during the Quebec referendum. And I remember I was a political science student. They don't teach you about campaigning and organizing and things like that, typically, at least they didn't then. And I was recruited into a phone bank. I didn't even know what a phone bank was. And I went into this giant room, massive long tables, a phone book, little old phone. And I really didn't have a good time. I remember thinking, why are they making me call strangers? And what is the point of this? Because no one really onboarded me, which, by the way, take that lesson, folks, really onboard people to the bigger picture. Well, I might have in the course of a few weeks called 200 people. And those of you that are old enough might recall that Quebec came close to seceding from Canada, but that referendum was lost by 0.59% of the vote, if I recall correctly. And I'm Acadian as well as Quebecois. And so for me, it was like my parents divorcing. And so it was very, very personal. And it was only when I saw that result that I realized the impact of a single person having hundreds of conversations. And nowadays, of course, there's emails and digital engagement and that sort of thing, but it's still the gold standard in my view to be having those kinds of conversations. So I probably feel most powerful as an organizer when I'm talking with someone across difference and bringing them along.
Thanks so much, Sonia. Now, Mox, you're a veteran of many campaigns. I'm going to ask you to pick just one, but maybe I'll get you to do an introduction and talk about a time when you felt really powerful.
Dinï's 8 years, Saka's 8 years, guys. I am Chief Namox. I am of the Tsayu clan of the Wet'suwet'en Nation. I actually caretake another name, which is Chief Glees, a high-ranking warrior chief. I'll start off by saying, you know, the biggest burden that a warrior will ever carry is a burden of peace. When you got guns pointed at you, when you got attack dogs, when you got helicopters coming at you, they're going through your doors with axes and power saws. They got their snipers standing there. You better carry that burden of peace very strongly, because you never stoop to their level. You know, I watched very closely what the NDP was doing where I live here. It's been NDP forever. I am so jaded right now. I am going to make comments that will offend people, but I'm good with that. They're my comments. You know, when you have a non-democratic party and then you got a liberally violent party and then you got the KKK conservatives, and they're all backing these projects that are going to kill this planet, because that's all our law is. We work from the ground up. It is the land, the air, the water, and everything that survives on it. This planet can survive without man, but we cannot survive without this planet. Last Sunday, I was on a panel, David Suzuki, Naomi Klein, and it was the same subject we're talking about today. And it was like in the green room before we got on stage, we did talk about, you know, this here immaculate election that simply happened. You know, you put somebody up in a democratic country, you're supposed to run elections properly. You don't do the dirty tricks that I've seen. And it just proves to me that it doesn't matter who we send, whether it be in Parliament or in the legislature, they get there, they drink the Kool-Aid, and you've lost them. And it is the people that brings them back. They can't stay lost forever. They claim to be leaders. I know what a leader is. You protect the earth, you protect the people. You don't protect the pocketbooks. That's never been our law. You know, when you have the dirty tricks that I seen in this last campaign, it just amazed me that they got away with it. And they'll continue to if people allow them to. You know, as Kai said, I've been in this a long time. You know, the tanker trap, we stopped that in the north. Fish farms, stopped that in the north. Assisted with the fish farms and Roten Archipelago, fighting TMX with our cousins of Tsleil-Waututh, and so there's a long list. Enbridge is one of my favorites because we bought one share. I went to every shareholders meeting, and Enbridge had to hire me a bodyguard to protect me from Enbridge. But that's what you need to do. Number one, don't be afraid and don't blink. Number two, use your voice. Be there. Rallies happen, show up. Panels happen, listen in, learn. Have your comments, be heard, be seen. Be there, be present. Boy, the democracy in this country, the way it's going, I can't even pick a bad time in the years I've been on this planet, but I can sure point out Harper. You know, he didn't want to kill our salmon, but he sure as hell didn't want to protect the habitat. And that really got the ball rolling. You know, during that fight with Enbridge, which doesn't exist on our territory, but they never truly go away. You know, we're fighting Coastal Gas Links. Our cousins at Gitsan going to be fighting 2, possibly 3 very shortly. You know, northwestern British Columbia is one of the last beautiful places you can drink the water out of the rivers. And I've been fortunate as a hereditary chief that my fellow chiefs have asked me to speak at United Nations, travel around the world, all over. And I haven't been to a place where I can drink out of a creek and river, except when I come home. And here we're, Canada is willing to give that up for what, $1 bill? I know how to cook a lot of things. I don't know how to cook money. Only politicians can cook money. But that's my introduction. Number one, be heard, be seen, man. Stand with the people. Don't sit back, because if you're quiet, they're going to continue. Messiah.
Thank you, Nemox. You always have a way of bringing us back to what really matters. And I want to come back to you in a minute for some of the options that that people have going forward. But I want to put it to all of our panelists, this question of what we do next. And I think there's a number of pathways in front of us right now. And some of them we can do both at once, but some of them, as the NDP has shown, you know, you're not allowed to be in the NDP and also work within another political party. So I'm going to start with Ashley and ask you, for people who are BC NDP members, what opportunities do you see coming up to push climate action inside the NDP?
We need to hold them accountable for their decisions. The executive, the majority of the executive who did vote for basically running over democracy, they need to be held accountable by the membership. So I think that we need to be organizing for the upcoming convention that's in 1 year, that's 12 months from now, so that we can support people who are actually going to be, who are going to respect the democratic process, who are going to respect the democratic process, but also who understand that we're in a climate crisis and that they can't just continue to be hypocritical. They say that they want reconciliation, but it doesn't come at the end of a gun, and they can't be forcing a pipeline through wet, sweat, and territory as they have been, and they need to be held accountable. So I think that BC NDP members have a responsibility to be organizing and working within the structures that exist to push for accountability. And that is what I am going to be doing. It is difficult to be in this party right now because the leadership is making such terrible decisions, and they are doing things that ultimately is suicidal, leading to the death of our climate and our planet. And as a mother of 3 children, I take that very seriously. And I think that it's really important that we do everything we can inside and outside of political channels to stop this ecocide. So for a long time, I personally organized outside of political parties, and I moved to a rural community, and I decided that I would get involved in a political party and in the BC NDP and try to make a difference from within. And it's been a long road, and I think it's always a long road to political change. And political parties need to be seen for what they are, which is just one tool in the toolbox. I'm a firm believer in a diversity of tactics to make political change. And for people who are in the NDP now, we have the majority of the membership. This movement that came together to support Angeli and this vision for a new deal for BC, we signed up so many people, and now we came very close to having a climate champion as the premier. She would have been the premier in a month, and that's incredible. It shows that the climate movement has political teeth now, which is a victory and something to be celebrated. And it shows that we are much closer to being able to achieve our policy goals than we have ever been before, which is so important. And especially having a vision for a new deal for BC, something that is so bold and visionary and understands that you have to address the climate crisis in a way that doesn't leave communities behind. Having a just transition, creating jobs for people, and making sure that we're investing in public good and in public services, and ultimately in climate resilience, because that's what happens when we invest in each other. We invest in our communities, and we build stronger, resilient communities when we do that. So this vision is something that I think resonates with a lot of people, and people understand that this is what we need. We're in a climate emergency. We can't keep on this path. We have to change it. We have to change the direction. And we have to also understand what are the root causes of it. Capitalism, colonialism, these are issues that we need to address. We're in a situation where not only is our ecosystems collapsing, but our social systems are collapsing. And this really goes to the heart, the core of BC NDP values, where we are supposed to be putting people before corporate profit, and honoring people and taking care of our health and well-being. So I think that with the situation that we're in right now, politically, we can make a difference. We can push for that new deal for BC, and we need to do it, because even whatever happens with Angeli, we shouldn't be a movement that crumbles when our head is cut off. We have to decentralize. We have to really water the grassroots. We need to build this movement up from the ground. We've already created like an amazing amount of momentum. We need to build on that momentum for a new deal for BC. And we can do that by organizing at all levels, inside and outside of the party. And within the party, that needs to be at the EDA level, the Electoral District Association level, in people's communities, in your towns, in your neighborhoods. We need to be getting together and having potlucks, climate dinners for a new deal. We need to be, and when we do that, we build community. And when we build community, we build climate resilience, because those social bonds are what's going to keep us, it's what's going to save us. So it's really important work. I think that, again, I'm just going to reiterate, using the political party, it's just a tool, it's a vessel. We need to work in tandem together. We need social movements to be working with political institutions so that we can achieve the kinds of policies that that we want to get put into place. It's really important that we don't abandon those institutions and allow power vacuums to exist, because when there is a vacuum, a power vacuum, it will be filled by people who are in it for themselves. And so we need to really recognize that we have a path to transformative change. There are these institutions that we can use to get there, to get our policies enacted. And it just boils down to numbers. And it has always boiled down to numbers. Political organizing has always just boiled down to numbers. And that's why in the campaign with Angeli, ultimately it was just a numbers game. And the number of people who wanted transformative climate action and a new deal for BC was greater than the number of people who didn't. So it's the same thing when we're organizing for convention, when we're organizing at the EDA level. It's just a numbers game. If you show up, you get a vote, you get a chance to participate, and you get a chance to push for these values and make them real and get them into actual action. So in terms of like concrete next steps, if you want to organize within the BC NDP, a lot of you have memberships now. Please don't cancel them, use them, show up, put them into action. And we're going to be running slates at every EDA and at the executive. And the way that works is basically the EDA, the Electoral District Association, is just a front door into the party. You get involved there, and then you can get involved on the provincial council, which is the governing body of the party. And you can also show up to convention, which is where all of the party policies are made. And one of the things that I've been working on as SCOE chair, or the chair of the Standing Committee on Environment and Economy, is developing regional assemblies for a Made in BC Green New Deal. And what we want to do is we want to go across the province and have open meetings with our members and with stakeholders and rights holders, and come together and really ground source ideas for how we can address the climate crisis in a way that doesn't leave anybody behind and is good for people. So that's kind of the project that we're working on over at SCOE. We want to expand that so people can get involved in it in all of their communities. And that's one way, getting involved at the EDA, running for positions on the executive, and ultimately running for a position or supporting people who are running for positions on the provincial executive. That's where we can hold people, the leaders who aren't making good decisions, accountable, and where we can democratize the party. And there's a very clear path forward for doing that. So I'm going to be holding workshops on how to organize within the BC NDP. And if you want to get involved in and show up to those and learn more, I am really happy to share that information. I think that the information has been withheld. The people who are in charge really don't want the members to get involved. I actually think that they disqualified Angeli, not because they were afraid of her, but because they were afraid of us. And I think that that is something that people need to really understand, is that there's power in collective organizing. And so let's do it.
Thanks a lot, Ashley. So I'm seeing a lot of love in the chat. I'm also seeing some people saying this party's irredeemable. And so I wanted to put another poll up and get a temperature check from folks in the crowd, just on how much energy you have for this idea of continuing to work within the NDP, or to try to make the BC NDP electoral district associations into a vehicle for mutual aid and solidarity work on the ground in local ridings. So while that poll is running, I want to bring Sonia into the discussion, because there's also a lot of people in the chat and a lot of people that we've heard from in the last couple of weeks who say, I told you so, like, this is the NDP, this is what they do. And a lot of those people are more at home in the BC Greens as a vehicle for climate action in provincial politics. And Sonia, I'm just curious where you see the opportunities coming up for people who are not willing to either stay members of the BC NDP, or who have been Greens all along and are tired of seeing that party get left out of the discussion.
Yes, thank you, Kai. I kind of view the question as kind of being your strategic advisor, everyone that's wondering what to do with your membership. The first thing is stick together no matter what you do. So if you're going to stick with the NDP, you go to the Greens, or just drop out of it altogether and stick with Dogwood, recognize that there are people working in inside change and outside change, and that both are necessary. And that we progressives on the left tend to really embrace our fissures and our divisions, and that is why we often lose, because I would say we already have the numbers game behind us, in the sense that there are more of us, but our fractures are generally what keep us out of power. So yes, the NDP have behaved this way in the past, and this is also how parties in power behave. I think Angeli said it best when she said, power is behaving exactly how it was designed to behave. It is very hard to enact inside change, and Ashley acknowledged that, and I tried it for a couple of years, and the reason for that is I want to give you a bit of a contextual analysis, because you need to think of the context to really figure out where can you be most impactful. Now, we're operating these colonial systems, they're patriarchal systems, they privilege wealth, power, and the more layers of those systems that you're operating within, the harder change becomes, because as they say, culture eats strategy for breakfast. Culture change is the hardest kind of change to make, and that is definitely what needs to happen in the NDP. While it requires grassroots mobilization, it's very hard to do culture change when you don't have the leadership behind you. I saw some chat in the chat about, for example, what happened with the BC Greens and Andrew Weaver. Speaking of culture change and the power of leadership, there's no coincidence Andrew Weaver left. He left of his own volition, but there was also a lot of inside change happening to try to move him out of that party, because there was a recognition that it needed to change its culture in order to carry out its values and mission. And I'd say that they've made a lot of progress in the last few years to get there. So you've got the NDP on the one hand, where they have the institution of a political party, which is a colonial institution, still held together by patriarchy and white dominant culture, and then it's sitting in government. So now you have all these other layers of institutions, including corporate power, all making it that much more difficult to change that institution. The Green Party is young, it's new, it's small. So if your avenue for change is going to be a political party, even setting aside all my implicit bias, to me, the strategic analysis is that you're more likely to make change within the Green Party if partisanship is the way you want to go. I will say this, true story, an NDP MLA during the CASA agreement years said to a Green Party MLA, "Thank goodness you're here. You are protecting us from the worst elements of our party." And the reason I say that, and I'll probably get in trouble for saying that, is let's look at Clean BC. Clean BC on paper ended up being what it was because the NDP were in minority government. Clean BC in practice has been incredibly lackluster. That is related to the fact that they have been in majority power. The only incentive for the NDP to change itself is a strong Green Party opposition. And so there's an incentive there for actually going and creating some noise in an opposition party, because without the Green Party feeling like a threat to the NDP, for 40 years, they have not picked up the mantle of championing climate. And they haven't had to. They electorally just haven't had to. And I think what you all just did is showed them that they do have to. And now there's an opportunity for you to continue to tell them that they have to. And I'm not going to tell anybody which way to go, because I honestly think that's a personal decision to make. But the advice that I would give you is that the NDP in the next election, if it does not think that the Greens are a threat, will not embrace climate. It will not do anything differently than it's done, because the way that it's operated up until now has put it in power. And that is one of the blind spots of being in power. You start to actually forget what is actually happening on the ground. It's no coincidence that they allowed their membership to shrink up, because you know what? It's hard to manage the membership. The membership does have power, but when you're in power in government, you are generally captured by these other forces, and to be pulled between those forces, corporate capture and their grassroots, is just a tension that you don't really want to have to manage. And so if they had really embraced the new membership, I would have felt a bit differently. I would have given different advice. And I will say, to give credit where credit is due, I just spoke with an NDP MLA today who was talking about ways to onboard and make new members feel welcome. So there is some lessons being learned, I think, from some folks that are working on inside change in the NDP to try to make space. And whether it's the Green Party or the NDP that you choose, everything that Ashley suggested are the avenues. You join your riding association, become a volunteer, get on executives, go to policy conventions. The difference is, though, when a party is in power, the amount that it actually listens to resolutions at convention, the amount that actually listens to its grassroots starts to shrink the more it's sunk its teeth into power. And so I would say, keep activated, try hard to not really be hard on people that have chosen a different path than you. Keep in mind that we're all working for some of the same things. Some people are choosing inside change. It's very hard. You have to maintain relationships inside and outside. And some people are going to choose to stay working in outside change. And it's really important that we keep bridges built across any sector that you folks decide to stay engaged with.
Thank you for that reminder, Sonia. I just had a quick follow-up. We're in this system in BC where we have first past the post, and we're in these ridings, right? We have these 87 ridings. Is there a geographic dimension to that choice?
I would say so. You know, speaking of strategy being context, 95% context. On the one hand, it's really important to pay attention to what's happening in the trend lines, right? The cautionary tale on that front, though, is Anjali is a good example. In the 2021 federal election, excuse me, the NDP had been polling third, fourth. It had finished third, fourth in that riding in previous elections. So to the point of the power of organizing, Anjali surged in those last few weeks and came very, very, very close to winning. So on the one hand, pay attention to what the electoral dynamics are. You might want to make a strategic decision about what makes most sense for you in terms of whether or not you're going to join a Green or an NDP RA. But at the same time, keep in mind that the power of a really visionary, truth-telling leader and organizer and the power of movement building can also shift the winds of change in a riding quite quickly. Often it takes multiple election cycles, but sometimes when you've got the right confluence of factors, you can actually make big change in a single riding in one election cycle.
Thanks. I'm thinking of places like West Van Sea to Sky, where who would have thought that the Greens would...
You want me to name where the Greens are strongest?
Well, when I look around the map, right? Like there are places where they are totally viable, right?
Yeah. Southern Vancouver Island, Nelson Creston, West Vancouver Sunshine Coast, absolutely, absolutely. They tend to do well where there's like this mixture of progressives on the one hand and I hate to say it, but aren't centrists on the other. And they tend to build a coalition across different constituencies wherever they win. And where Greens win, it's usually because they have grown the voter turnout. So they tend to find a way to appeal to people that are currently disengaged. And that is, I think, one of the strengths of a new party, especially a new party with a relatively new leader that just doesn't have the baggage of Andrew Weaver, that there's the opportunity there to reach people that currently will never vote for the NDP or the Liberals, that are just, you know, done with it all, understandably, right? It's hard to be a person with conscience and believe in any of these parties most of the time. So what I usually say to folks is pay attention to who's running meet the individuals that are running. Maybe you want to run yourself, and make a decision based on the person. I'm very much a person over party kind of decision maker when it comes to who I support in elections.
Okay. I did hear you say, though, that the environmental movement outside the parties and the Green Party need to both be strong in order for the NDP to see that as a threat, for them to course correct. So I want to put another poll up just to get a sense of where people in the room are at in terms of working within the Green Party as a vehicle. And I know from the chat that a lot of people are speaking from places like Southern Vancouver Island, where the Greens are a viable electoral option. So we'll put that poll up and we'll let that run for a little bit. I wanted to turn back to Nemox and talk about the options outside of colonial politics, because there's a lot of people who are just expressing how jaded and fed up they are with this whole game. And I wanted to know what opportunities you see outside of party politics, and really what your message is to people that are feeling sort of like getting tired of going round and round with the political parties.
Well, I think first I'll start off with get the hell out there and vote. You don't like the people in there, turf them. It ain't that hard. Go vote. We've done it before, we'll do it again. Unfortunately, this time it was the NDP where I live. So outside of the politics, it's the same as before. Get together, have a discussion, follow your heart. Your heart will tell you that without land, water, and air, there's no future. Getting together and have the discussion and balancing what is considered best by politics and actually best by nature, they're not the same thing. Like I said, once they either get into parliament or else in the legislature, they start drinking the Kool-Aid and their vision changes. I think the best thing to do, if you want to see what is to be damaged, go there. Don't just have a discussion. Feet on the ground, drink the water, eat the food, meet the people. Take that time. You know, get away from what you might consider your comfort zone and go out there. I know with our territory, it's absolutely beautiful and stunning. You know, people come here to holiday, and yet because of the narrative that is out there of all the violence, which is true, it is there, but the narrative has it that we're the violent ones, and we're not. As hereditary chiefs, we'd never condone that. You know, with the things that are happening on our territory, it doesn't happen anywhere else. And you know, I'm the son of a Second World War veteran, and I'm really afraid about the way that this so-called democracy is going. You know, when you're jailed and threatened for just going onto your lands or going to access your food, it really makes you wonder. And you know, the NDP were the best critics ever. We voted them in, and it was them that signed those orders to bring the police on us. It was them that signed the orders to deforest the entire pipeline. Not one stick left. 297 kilometers long in our territory. You know, so you got to think. We put our faith in people, but it changed. So maybe it's time to do a shakeup. Shakeup is a good thing. You know, if you just sit still and let everything stay normal, what they consider normal, you don't get advancement. You don't move with the times. You know, to get that old boys network going, and it stays the same. You need to get different people in there. I'm so proud of this next generation coming up because they see the full picture. It's not that they're little blinders on and site specific. They're taking in all of the picture that is there, and they're taking all the good, the bad, and they're saying, you know what, we do have a choice. We can move forward. You know, the way it was done before isn't working. There are new ways to do it. There are better ways to do it, most certainly. But I really think keeping your democracy going is first and foremost. We're supposed to be a democratic country, one of the best democratic countries in the world. And I don't see that where I live. I don't know how anybody else feels about stepping outside your door. You're under surveillance 24 hours a day. I don't know how you feel about staring down the barrel of a gun. I don't know how you feel about having canines on you. I don't know how you feel about having your women locked up, thrown in jail, even media thrown in jail. This is how we live. So I think that if you get out and vote, communicate and talk, number one, be human. Look at that big picture and have a lot of faith in the youth, because that is our future, and I do have faith in them. Messiah.
Thanks a lot, Nemox. I hope most people on this call are aware in some way of what has been happening on Wet'suwet'en territory, and you spoke to some of that. Are there things that people can do who live far away or who who are watching this and want to help directly, is there anything that they can do to support the authority of the hereditary chiefs, or to help to put the spotlight back on the territory and what's happening there?
Absolutely. There's always rallies. You know, information is at the tip of your finger. Go out there. You know, we have our yintoaccess.com. We've done our Peace and Unity Summit. And, you know, those were great events. And it was just about educating people. Like, we're not going to stand around and yell and scream at each other. Leave that for Parliament Hill and leave that for the legislature. There were some kids, they yell and scream and stomp their feet, and people aren't even allowed to talk. I wouldn't even let my grandchild act that way. But these are supposed to be the leaders of this country. But always be aware of what's going on. Always be there. Like, it's just so good just to have people together. It was stated earlier, when people get together, that's how we make change, by showing up. And, you know, the information that is out there, it is easy to access. We did a cross Canada tour after we did the Peace and Unity Summit. And yeah, what do we do? How do we get together? Anybody can start a rally. Anybody can get together. You heard Ashley earlier saying, you reach out, share the information. Number one, be truthful. You don't need to listen to the narrative that's out there. Know what the truth is. The truth is, we'll never ever be violent. You know, there have been a number of setups out here where damage has happened, and they're trying to point their fingers at us. And I know it wasn't us. We, the fellow chiefs, our nation, we wouldn't allow that. It's a pretty dirty tactics that they're doing. I don't know. I was asked, are you crazy to do what you do? Well, it helps, but being what's voting helps more. You know, we know what we're doing. We know what the future is, because if we continue on this path that we're on, what are we leaving for our children and our grandchildren? You know, the name I carry is thousands of years old. And it's so strange that my grandmother was alive when we had European contact. And this is what we're facing today. My father fought in the Second World War, and this is what we're facing today. And you know, that gradual progression of having people losing their rights and freedoms, it sneaks up on you. And then all of a sudden, Angeli is a perfect example. They make the rules up as they go. You know, they're breaking the law here. They're going against the Constitution of Canada. You know, 3 times they haven't answered to the United Nations on stopping these projects, stopping the violence. You know, I worked so very hard at the UN there to make sure that we didn't get a seat on the Security Council there. I'm very pleased we didn't get one, because I don't see where the security of the people of this country are if the elected officials are continued to allow to go on this path that they're on. Keep yourself aware. Don't sit back. Sitting back is not an option. You know, use your voice. Every one of you is a hero. Prove it. Get up there. Say something. Be human. That's what we're doing. We're being human. Even though they don't treat us like we are. We are, and we will continue to be.
Thank you again, Mox. And we'll do our best at Dogwood and with our allies to continue to share updates from what's out in Yinta, because this is really ground zero for everything that we're talking about, and what this province does next here on the unceded territories of the Wet'suwet'en and the Kiksand is really going to not only determine our chances of survival in the climate crisis, but also whether we can call ourselves a democracy in a country that follows the rule of law. So I don't want to cut this discussion short, but I do want to get to some questions from the audience. And we told people 8 o'clock. Sorry, we're going to go a little bit over. Such is life. The third question in the poll is how much energy you have for working outside of political parties. And I wanted to put that up, but I'll also give you the results from the first 2. So it's almost a dead heat. So with 300 people on the line, there were 39% who said that they had energy for working within the BC NDP. There were 41% who said they had energy for working within the BC Green Party. So we are almost a perfect balance in this room of people who are taking that energy into those different political traditions. But we're also seeing a lot of enthusiasm. I'm looking at the results live right now, mid-80s for energy working outside of political parties. And the reality is we can do both, right? You can work within a political party and you can work outside of political parties. And despite what Elizabeth Cull would tell you, that is perfectly healthy and normal, and need to be building stronger bonds between grassroots movements and political parties as a vehicle for legislative change. And I'm seeing that echoed from a number of people in the chat. There's a question that's come up a few times in the chat, but also in the Q&A, and that is around basically creating a new political party. And I don't know the name of the person who put this question in, but they said, has any thought been given to bringing together the provincial progressive NDPers and Greens, i.e. some of the people on this call, into one new party that has a chance to form government in BC? And I want to throw that wide open to our panel. What do you think of this idea that's come up from time to time of starting a new political party?
Can I ask a clarifying question? A brand new party or trying to unify the Greens and the New Democrats? Those are very different.
The question asker didn't specify. They said
Okay.
a new party, but yeah, where do your thoughts go, Sonia?
My first thought is Vancouver election just now. Number one, I think more voices, more parties is healthy. One of the problems with the two-party system, I often say, is it's one choice more than none, which is not really a robust democracy. And especially in Canada, which most people don't know, is amongst the most whipped in its party culture, i.e. Elected members generally don't have their own voice. So if you have 2 or 3 parties in a legislature, you've only got 2 or 3 voices as opposed to 88 or hundreds. So more parties could be good in a general sense. I think in the current electoral context in British Columbia, could land us with the BC Liberal government. Like, that's just the way the numbers tend to work. So yeah, I would say trying to fix these two, the current options or try to bring it together. I don't see that ever happening. Like, whenever people talk about that, I would love to see that happen, frankly. I don't see it happening because of the nature of partisanship. And it reaches, the older a party is and the more it's been in power, it reaches a cult-like kind of ethos. And it becomes very, very difficult to get them thinking about working together on something, much less ever forging a permanent bond. And part of the reason for that is what happens in the trenches, right? Like, I have been in the trenches, and there's a lot of behavior that happens on election campaigns that has created massive divides in British Columbia, particularly between the BC Greens and the BC NDP. So I would say, if you want to do partisan politics, I would say it's probably better use of your energy to engage with the existing parties than it would be to start a new one, given the current reality.
Anyone else want to weigh in on that?
I can weigh in. I think that it's ridiculous that we have 2 left-wing parties that are pretty much similar, splitting the vote. I think that it would be great if we had one united left-wing party. And I think that what we, just like Sonia was talking about, in our first past the post system, it is problematic if we continue to fracture the vote, because it can lead to the right gaining strength and gaining political power. And it has. Over the last few decades, we saw the right wing really come together and put aside their differences and decide to work together so that with a long-term goal to gain power. And they have. And at this point in time, we're seeing a rise in far right organizing and far right rhetoric, and I think that's really scary. And I think that the best way that we can combat that is to work together on the left. And I say the left because it is really important to me, as the daughter of people who are workers, as a racialized person, that we have a strong democratic socialist or social democrat or socialist left wing that can counter the forces of capitalism and address the rampant greed that is behind capitalism. And so I think that in this time of the rising far right, more than ever, we need to put aside our differences. We need to find our common ground. We need to look at the bigger picture of what's at stake. Not only are we facing catastrophic climate change, we're also facing fascism, and that's a real threat that will disproportionately impact vulnerable people, racialized people, poor people, so many people who are the targets of fascist violence. And that's, I think, a very real threat. And I don't want to live in a world that deteriorates into the world of the road. I think that we need to have strong social programs and strong social cohesion so that we can combat that. And there's a lot of research to show, and historically we see that the way that we combat fascism is by creating strong social bonds, strong communities, and we need that for climate resilience. So again, it's about coming together, organizing at a grassroots level, and remembering that political parties are just tools, and we should use these tools strategically in a way that can achieve our values, our goals, our policy goals, and make sure that we're actually using it in a good way so that people can have a good life. So yeah, I think that it would be great if we had one left-wing party that was dedicated to building a new deal for BC.
Okay. Namox, there's a question for you in the Q&A here. Penny asks, would love to see another Shutdown Canada campaign. Chief Namox, any comment?
You know, it's actually against our law to tell another nation what to do, but we would not disagree. It's an idea, but it is against our law to tell another nation what to do. I say that because on the last one, my phone was ringing off the hook, provincial and federal. Call them, tell them to open things up. I said, that's against our law. It's an act of war. I said, you guys are already committing that on us. Do you think I really want to do that to another nation? No. They make their decisions the way they want to go through, and their reason will be their reason. So I think that people will do what the heart will tell them. I am a true believer in that. Understood,
and thank you for the clarification. I think the question is coming from the energy that so many people have in the room for remembering that grassroots power right before COVID, when people all over the country really did provoke a political crisis in solidarity with Wet'suwet'en people, and it's been a while since we've seen that kind of power on the ground. I'm just going to give you the poll results from our last little temperature check here. We asked how much energy you have for working outside of political parties, and 85% of people said they have a lot. So we're definitely seeing energy for working within the Green and NDP right now, but also an overwhelming amount of energy from the room for working outside of political parties. There's a few more questions that I wanted to get to, but one just keeps coming up over and over, and that's about proportional representation. Is there still a pathway in British Columbia to get to a voting system where we're not fighting each other in these ridings under first past the post? Does anyone see a pathway to voting reform?
A minority government and a CASA with pro-rep in it, but in a different way than it was last time.
That sounds like flipping a coin and being on its edge, but it happened before. It happened before. Yeah, I don't know. Any other thoughts if you wanted to weigh in? Tara says a citizens' assembly. I mean, that has happened a couple of times in BC. We certainly jumped into the pro-rep campaign and just found that it was another predetermined outcome. It was a very, very difficult fight to be in. Ashley, did you want to weigh in?
Yeah, I think that it needs to be pushed for at the ground. I think that's a social movement question. I think that that is something that really needs grassroots organizing to happen, and it should happen, and it needs to happen. And one of the other things that we can do is support candidates to run and nominate candidates to run who are dedicated to PR. So one of the things that I should have mentioned earlier for a pathway within the BC NDP, when we organize within EDAs as members, we also get the opportunity to choose who's going to be the candidate for MLA. And so we can do something like they did in the States with AOC, run the primaries. We can run candidates who are climate champions, who are dedicated to stopping fracking, stopping LNG development, who are dedicated to investing in public services and addressing economic inequality and fighting for economic justice and PR and democratization. Those are the kinds of candidates that we should be choosing and running. And as members, we have the opportunity to do that. So that is one of the things that I'm personally going to be working on while also organizing for convention. Okay,
thanks. There's a question here from Quinn. I want to let Quinn ask it themselves. If Quinn, you're still on the line, I'm going to bring you in and let you put your question to the panel.
Thank you, Jeff. Yes, so at this point, it's become clear that the BC NDP leadership is corrupt and they have violated the BC NDP member rights and thus quite possibly violated the BC NDP constitution by undemocratically crowning Edie as premier. And so the BC NDP leadership punished its party members for trying to practice democracy. So now I feel that we need to punish them for undermining democracy. I think it's important that we make an example out of David Eby and his party insiders. We need to show the rest of Canada's NDP leadership that if they disrupt the participation of the party's members in decision making, they'll suffer consequences. And so would trying to recall David Eby from his position as premier and demanding a new leadership race with Anjali Appadure as a candidate be a viable course of action for the BC NDP for its members to take?
Thanks a lot, Quinn. So question to the panel, is there a pathway to having the leadership race done over again? Or yeah, do you see a way of making that happen?
That's definitely an option. If we have the majority of provincial councillors decide to not ratify the provincial executive's decision, for example, in December, or to call a special convention at which there would be a leadership review vote, then yes, absolutely, we could start the leadership race all over again and Anjali could run again. That is definitely an option. To make it happen, we would need to have a majority of the provincial council decide to do that. So that's around 60 people or 50 people. So if 50 provincial councillors said, let's have a special convention, then yeah, it would happen. I think it's 50. It might be 75%. But if we had the majority and met the requirements for it, then yes, we could do that. We could do it tomorrow.
Wow. Okay. Thanks for the clarification, Ashley. We are over time, and I hate we supper if they haven't done that already. I want to thank our panelists again for giving us so much of their time and for bringing all the wisdom of their experience to our discussion tonight. Before we go, I wanted to bring Paige in. She's our Vancouver organizer. There's an event coming up on Saturday, a Wet'suwet'en Solidarity March that people have been putting the details in the chat. And Paige, there's some other stuff coming up that I wanted to give you the floor just to give people some things they can put on their calendar and some ideas about actions they can take.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Kai. And thanks everybody for being here. We were close to 300 people at one point on the call, and definitely hundreds more at home who are going to be watching in the next few days. So thank you. And thank you for coming and participating in the chat and sharing your thoughts and ideas. Tonight really was about that, about making space for the many ways that we can move forward. At Dogwood, we want to be thinking deeply about the strategy and the opportunities, and then we want to bring it to all of you as our community. So it's really great to have you all here. Some of the things I guess that I want to just offer for many of you, you were volunteers with Dogwood over our campaigns this year. Maybe you helped phone bank on this specific campaign. And I really just want to celebrate that and like call on you all to give yourselves a pat on the back for standing up for climate action. It was a really powerful moment. And especially for those of you too who weren't part of Dogwood, but were participating in other ways. Together, we showed that organized people power is a threat to the status quo, and that is huge. While there's lots of folks who want to paint it as a hostile takeover, we know that it wasn't. It was democracy in action, right? It's everyday people like you picking up the phone to call your own friends and family and talk about politics, and to talk about whose voices and what narratives need to be heard at the decision-making table. And, now I think more than ever, we are facing a set of political forces and corrosive narratives that lead us to not see or trust each other. And our success as climate activists depends on us resisting that. It means us reaching out when those forces are telling us to isolate. It means coming together when they tell us to divide. And by getting ourselves organized, that is how we can overcome those impulses. That is how we can build strong and connected communities that can stand up in times of crisis. And more than that, we can build the kind of people power that can resist and can win in fights against, oil and gas lobbyists and captured politicians. And certainly we know that these fights are coming, they're not over. Just this month, we're hearing rumblings about Enbridge asking for another permit extension on their West Coast Connector pipeline. And if that's completed, that is going to transport 4 times the amount of fracked gas as CGL. Not to mention the impact on local communities as militarized police come in and environmental harm multiplies. So that's one thing that I want to put on your radar. We're going to need a massive public mobilization to be able to block that permit. And that's just one of the 4 pipelines that are planned up north. And of course, there's democracy work. All of what we've talked about tonight, what our panelists have highlighted, is that we need to keep participating and keep pushing to transform our democracy so that everyday people have more power, have more control than corporate lobbyists. So that is all to say, there are fights ahead that really need us to stay united and to stay organized, whether you are jaded or you are brand new to the movement or you are full of rage. As Namak said, we need to stay involved. Don't sit back. I know something in the chat that I'm seeing is, folks having really different visions about where we go from here. And I want to lift that up. Like it is okay for us to be and have different perspectives on the work going forward. With thousands of us who joined the party in this moment, there's going to be different ways that we move forward and pull in the same direction. So, I think one thing we see sometimes on the left is kind of eating ourselves. I know someone has noted in the chat that the right is really good at not doing that. And so we need to definitely take that lesson and have that sense of strategy that knows that this is like a movement ecosystem and folks are going to play a different role in the fight. And whether you are going to move forward with your NDP membership, whether you're going to head over to the Green Party, or you're going to continue showing up in the streets and doing action outside party politics, those are all going to play a really important role in these fights. For us at Dogwood, it is our mandate to keep on organizing. And so we're really grateful to have all of you on the call tonight and to stick with us. We have teams of volunteers across the province who stay on that inside track with Dogwood and participate in forming our strategy and building community together. So I invite all of you to step up and get more involved in our community of organizers if you have capacity. We'll pop a link in the chat to sign up as a volunteer for you. The other thing is knowing that if you are already involved in grassroots organizing with other groups, like that is also pulling in the same direction. This really isn't about competing. That scarcity model is one that is put onto us by capitalism, by colonialism, by the folks on the other side of this fight who want us to feel disconnected from each other. So, limit that. Yeah, as Dogwood, we are going to continue to identify and plan for more opportunities when we can mobilize and pull that power back and put it back in the hands of everyday people and show David Eby and the BC NDP that the climate movement is not backing down. So whether that's responsive actions in the streets this weekend, phone zaps at him and his ministers, getting out on picket lines in solidarity with striking workers, or amplifying, opportunities for action from our allies like the ones that were shared tonight. Thank you so much, Namox, Sonia, and Ashley. And yeah, I guess I want to leave you with that, and maybe leave you with one more thought about victories. I'm seeing some folks in the chat feeling frustrated about the idea that this fight is over. Also lots of frustration about things like the waffle and the number of members who were expelled, and those senses of losses after our movement tries. And, we make progress, but not everything. And I want to say those aren't losses. That is such a huge success. And that is such an amazing legacy to look back on. I look back and I see the waffle and I'm like, hell yeah, wow, they did that. And they pushed so hard and so far that, power wouldn't accept it. And now we have that as a legacy to call back to and be like, look at what this party could be. Look at what it was in the past. We need to return to that. So of course it sucks that it got quashed, but I'm glad it happened, right? I'm glad that folks were willing to do that hard work and organize, and then to try again over the years that followed. And yeah, I want to leave you with that thought that partial victories are still victories, and they are steps on our path to change and progress. And yeah, for those of you who want to keep having this conversation, Dogwood has a volunteer webinar meeting, kind of province-wide event coming up later this month on the 23rd. So if you are signed up as a volunteer on our website, we will share that link to register with you, and also share some of those details in our follow-up email. We'd love to keep having this conversation. At that meeting, we'll be looking back at some of the ways Dogwood's worked to make change this year, and then start to brainstorm and look ahead at what's possible. So that is all from me. I will pass it back to you, Kai, to take us out.
Thanks so much. That's a wonderful note to end on. And yes, we will send out a follow-up email, hopefully tomorrow, to everybody who RSVP'd. So you'll get a link to the recording, but also all of the links that flew by in the chat tonight from our panelists and from Dogwood. So we'll make sure that you get that in your inbox tomorrow. And I just want to thank everyone again for carving out time for this really important and exciting discussion. It does feel like we are making history, like things are not over, and we have set something in motion. And now the question is where to channel the energy that's been generated. So thank you so much again to everybody who tuned in tonight, and to our wonderful panelists. We're going to call it. Thanks very much, everyone. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.